Welcome back to part two of fascinating topic, psychoanalysis, personality disorders, and archetypes. Over to you, sir.
Um, Last comment that I was making was this. If the therapist knows in elemental terms, in Freudian, Kleinian, or even more elemental terms, what is wrong and what is the way forward, and then uses the Jungian approach, it's perfectly fine. But if somebody directly goes into the Jungian path and does not go deep enough to be elemental, then he remains at a very macro level. Because the archetype itself is a macro entity. Like when you say the child archetype, it's a combination of many things. It's liveliness, it's innocence, it's curiosity, it's wonder, it's play. So many things come together to make this entity called the archetypes. And one of the discussions we had where we went into the manufacturing of archetypes, that how these qualities come together and put themselves together to create one entity, which is then the archetype. Which means nature would have to collect these entities and put them together in some specific way to create the archetype. So if from an epistemological point of view, we look at it, archetype becomes a macro entity where many epistemological entities, elemental entities, are put together by nature to constitute this macro entity. So those elemental entities, if we know, it's better. If we don't, then in many cases, we can remain off ground. And in many cases, it may not give results. Not always, but in many cases, it may not give results. So that is the last comment I wanted to.
So, as the discussion today is about the personality disorders and archetype, into the specifics, how do we go into each personality disorder vis-a-vis DSM and archetype?
I'll use a mixture of all forms of archetypes. Natural, unconscious, omnipotent, mythological, social, all forms of archetypes I'll use to go into the 10 personality disorders. So from a causality point of view, we can go into it. And then naturally, the causality will give us a hint how to heal. And then how to create a discourse to lead towards a destination. So there are three components. Causality in terms of archetypes, the healing process in terms of archetypes, and the language to be used to facilitate the process. There are three components here from therapy point of view. So let us look into it. First, paranoid personality disorder. In causality terms, it is the excess activation, overactivation of the predator and overactivation of the helpless child and underactivation of the protector, the underactivation of the hero. And therefore, the destination would be deactivation of the predator archetype, the activation of the protector archetype, and the modification of the helpless child into a resourceful child archetype, and the awakening of the hero archetype. Now, how do you make it happen? That's the question. And that is where the difficulty of technique comes in. That how do you make it happen? Theoretically, it's fine. But in reality, how do you make it happen? So the safe space of the therapy and the safety of the therapist, that becomes the first internalization of the protector archetype. The cognitive inquiry into the nature of the fear reduces the power of the predator archetype. The encouraging words support of the therapist, they awaken the hero archetype. Often, family support may also be needed to support the hero archetype, because the hero can't do much in the real world without resources. In order to awaken the hero archetype, we may have to do some activity, and the activity may need resources. So that is how practically the activation and deactivation of archetype happens. And during the course of this therapy, because we are thinking in those terms, we speak in those terms so as to awaken some protective archetype in him. And that may be a recourse to his mythological feelings, a recourse to his religious beliefs, a recourse to something mystical like a mantra or something. So whatever helps can be taken help of. And we have to be clear always that while we are trying to activate and deactivate this, we are in elemental terms dealing with an upsurge of anxiety. In elemental terms, we are looking at deposition of omnipotence in the other and de-idealization of the self. We are looking at the split which is open, where the bad object, omnipotent bad object, is deposited in the predator. So
in that case, sir, for example, in the environmental setup, if the client or the patient is very strong, and as you said in the beginning of the discussion, that most of the archetypes are present, they're the potential archetypes. And if a big trauma takes place, right? So that brings in the shift in the archetype, depending upon how the person chooses to operate and handle and cope up with it. So is it just like the regular therapy, what you just mentioned? Is it just like the regular therapy? It is reparenting or minimizing the environmental lacks. And is it the same way the therapist brings in that position for that archetype to develop?
Yeah, so it's at the elemental theoretical level, there is a difference in looking at it, but at the macro level, it's the same. For example, at the macro level, what would Jungian therapy say? It would say the sickness, whatever it is fundamentally frustrating the program of life. It's frustrating the process of individuation. And that would mean that age appropriate what he should be doing, he is not able to do because something is holding him back, what we call the pathology. So our job is to remove that holding back so that he can lead a normal life. Now that would
For example, if there is this person whose mother archetype is activated because of the over dependent personalities around that person, right? Now this is in response to someone else's pathology.
Correct.
So for that individual, this is the best coping way of handling it, because individual is not going to repair others because he's not the therapist. So when it is in response to some other personality disorders around, it is creating the what you use the word, that it is creating that conflict between the program of life, which is supposed to be somewhere else. So it has them. So we see it again as a pathology only. Or do we consider
it's a pathology because it's frustrating the individuation process. And if you talk about it in normal terms, he is not able to be a normal person. He is not able to do age appropriate activities. And the same thing we talk in Jungian language to say the individuation process or the program of life is frustrated. In simple words, he is not able to live like a normal person, age appropriate. Now here the conceptualization will be that too much presence of the mother archetype and the child archetype has not allowed the hunter and the hero archetype to awaken. So what Jung talks about is in the environment, We need presence of certain people, certain facts to awaken certain archetypes inside of us. So in the environment, if there is no hero, no hunter, those archetypes remain unactivated. In simple language, if the father is not good enough, not masculine enough, the son finds it difficult to arouse his masculinity. Or if the father is too dominant, too intrusive, again the son finds it difficult to completely awaken, accept, and stabilize his masculinity.
Fair enough.
So the normal facts of the life remain. The language in which they are understood and talked about, they change.
Right.
In very simple words, age appropriate, if he is able to do everything that a normal person at that age is supposed to do, he is not in pathology. If he is not able to do, he is in pathology. Now, how do we understand it in Jungian terms is a different thing altogether. How do we understand in Freudian terms is different, but what is clear is that there is impairment of normalcy.
And so if there is this frustration of unlived archetype, for example, if a child has been surrounded with people who have asked him to mature before his biological stage of life where he's supposed to be or she's supposed to be. So that unlived archetype, that also would create disturbances.
Of course, the person would feel listless.
That can also, right.
Without energy, he would not feel grounded. He would not be in touch with the creative resources of oneself. In Winnicottian terms, it would be activation of the false self because of premature maturing. We are talking of a premature maturing, where the person has not lived out the immature part and then organically grown into the mature part. His immature part remains unlived and maturity is forced upon him. Like, for example, let us say there is a very poor boy from a poor family in India, and in order to make some money and support the family, he starts working at a tea shop. And the boy is only 10, 12 years of age. And everyone around is 25 plus. And they want him to behave as one of them. And they force maturity upon him. They want him to value time. They want him to be quick. They want him to be focused and not childlike and not play around. They don't want him to live his childhood. They want him to be a sincere, dedicated, mature person lost in his work. So they force maturity upon that person, and the person always has an unlived child inside. And he has no choice but to create a false self to cope with the world. So the same thing here in Jungian terms, it would be that the child archetype was never fully activated and matured and organically surpassed into the hunter archetype. You force the hunter archetype or the adult archetype onto the person with an unlived child, and the child always then at a deep level wants to live it out. And often they live it out in connection with a guru figure. So they cannot become a child anywhere, but here they become like a child. And often they feel dull and listless without access to the deep creative resources of the self. So there the recourse would be to go back and reactivate the child archetype. And reduce the pressure of the hunter archetype, the hero archetype.
So basically the magnified archetypes, the unlived archetypes, the frustrated, imposed archetypes, everything in the light of therapy has to be addressed.
So the ideal is age appropriate, complete living, and then moving ahead. And the spiritual ideal is transcending. So that whatever way it is, this does not happen, that calls us back. There is a discussion which is titled Manage to Go Back.
Okay.
where we have to go back to our past in many ways if we really want to be self-knowledgeable, healthy, wholesome, healed, and so on. And that may even be going back to the school where we were, going back to the society where we were brought up. It may be going
Right.
back to the village. In many communities, there is a tradition in India that when a person becomes very sick towards the old age and he's about to die, uh, he wants to go back to his village where he was born and where he experienced his childhood, and he gets that closure. He goes back to his village to die. It's a very common tradition that people from village come to cities to work. When they become old, they go back to the villages. They prefer dying there. So this is like managed to go back. So we have to also go back to those archetypes which we never fully lived out age appropriate and we passed over. Other personality disorders, I'll go quickly, otherwise we'll fall short of time. Bipolar, the archetype is phoenix. You fly in mania, and when the sun rises, you crash. And the healing archetype to be activated is logos. So it is all feeling and no logos. It's all eros. And we have to bring logos for stability.
Okay.
It's a problem of stability. It's all feeling and no thinking and no stability of thinking. So borderline, the archetype of the clay man. You touch and the man disintegrates. Narcissistic personality disorder, the archetype is of Narcissus. The dependent personality disorder from Indian mythology, you can look at Bhakta Prahlad.
Okay.
You don't do anything, you just pray, you idealize the other, you surrender to the other, and the other does. The omnipotent other does everything. The antisocial personality disorder, you can look at Indian mythology of Duryodhan, who says, I know what is right, I know what is wrong, but I cannot do what is right, I cannot avoid what is wrong. Ingrained antisocial personality disorder. And obviously, one of the reasons will be 100 times experiencing the sibling rivalry.
Fair enough, sir.
OCPD. In Matrix, there is a character called the key man who keeps
Right.
all the keys together and who knows how to fix which key. And he has the fondness, this hobby of collecting those keys. In Indian history, you can think of Vedvyas, who put all the disparate things in a very orderly way. And you can look at Panini, who heard all the Sanskrit spoken and then codified it into 8 chapters, giving order to something amorphous. Schizoid, the archetypal image is that of the yogi, the avadut, who does not want to interact with anybody. The histrionic, the archetypal component, the manifestation is in the seductress. In Indian mythology, some of the apsaras, Rambha or those apsaras,
Urvashi.
Yeah, Urvashi. The sadomasochistic, the torturer. In literature, you can find a very good depiction in Charles Dickens' novel, Great Expectations.
Okay.
There is a character called Miss Havisham. So she was betrayed in love and she could never learn to be happy again or to be connected to anybody again. So she lived a lonely life. She was a rich lady, so she lived a lonely life, living in a big palace all by herself. But in order to revenge from men, she brought up a very beautiful girl, Stella, and she would call the hero of the novel, a young child, to sit near her, to fall for her and then be denied, and to feel that pain. It was almost like, in a symbolic way, revenge from that man. And this was a very cold manifestation of the sadomasochism. Like, to put somebody in a situation where to be so near and to be denied. One of the most difficult things to experience and control, to be so near and to be denied. So these are some of the corresponding archetypes which we can use. And of course, the healing component is a separate archetype, and then the language. So we don't have the time to go into each of them, but like what we did in the first one, we can do it for all the personality disorders. The causal archetype, the healing archetype, and the journey from here to there, the language of archetypes in between.
So can a study of archetype lead to good research questions in the area of personality disorders?
Yes, it can. Because if we look at archetypes around in society, in mythology, and also in human beings, we can find certain archetypes for which there is no corresponding personality disorder. And there the question arises, if this archetype has been in the human society for so long, it must have been because there's something related to it. And if the archetype talks about something pathological, are we missing something? That there is a pathological archetype that is dealing with pathology in some way, around for hundreds of years, and corresponding to it, we don't see any pathology in DSM. So are we missing something? So that is one very important component. The second is the healing of the personality disorder. That we find a mythological story which has been around for hundreds of years, where X is healed by something. And let us say X is suffering from one of the personality disorders, which means the traditional knowledge has somehow figured out how this can be healed. Now that may be accurate, half accurate, quarter accurate, whatever that be. But it gives us some opening, some clue to a potential healing strategy. So this is where we say the unconscious has stated the problem in mythology. That a large number of people who had this problem did not go to a therapist or a psychiatrist. They stated it through mythology. And they also stated the cure through mythology. So the problem has been stated in mythology. The solution has been stated in mythology. And we can also look at very important element, the historical movement of myths. Like what Kohut said, the epidemiology of mental health is very cultural. Freud's patients were not the patients Kohut saw. They are very different type of patients. So if we see that some myth was very popular, and let's say we are dealing with myths dealing with pathology, that some of those myths were very popular for 3 centuries and then they fell out of favor. Which means in those 3 centuries, people were suffering from some pathology and they could relate to those myths, which we no longer relate to. And today we relate to very different myths. So if we can just draw a historical line of myths dealing with pathology, we can see how across centuries the pathology has changed. Because people would speak through myths, they're unconscious. So we can index it to the movement of the way the personality development chapter has developed itself from DSM 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we can index the movement of the pathology dealing myths and the personality disorder chapter and see the commonality and dissonance. And this would lead to some very interesting research questions.
How does your model, HEAT model, look at personality disorders?
It brings in an element of karma, the element of self-journey in causal terms. That it may be that the personality disorder is because of the karmic load, or the soul wants a kind of journey which is possible only with this personality disorder. or the two of them combined. So we don't stop at the natural explanation. We go into the ideas of karma and self-judgment. This is one difference in terms of causality. In terms of the process, we look at the functioning of the mind, which can happen involving the archetypes or not involving the archetypes.
Okay.
Right? Which means the desire can be independently generated, frustration can be independently generated, and then go to the personal unconscious without involving the collective unconscious. There are open spaces in the model. So from the chakras, the root of the desires, there is a path where there is open space in the collective unconscious and goes straight to the personal unconscious, or open space in personal unconscious goes straight to the conscious. So there are open spaces in the collective unconscious, open spaces in the personal unconscious, and material can be generated even below the collective unconscious at an elemental level. So in functional terms, that's a different model than that of Freud or Jung, which involves what they use, personal and collective, but there are open spaces and functioning is possible without involving them. And functioning is also possible involving them. The next important point is the productivity of pathology. That pathology is not seen as a unvarnished sin, as a condemned pathology. It's also seen, there is a cost-benefit analysis of it. It is not only cost, it's also benefit. That many times people say that had I not had this pathology, I would not have done so much of intellectual or spiritual work. So there is also the positive aspect of it, the productivity of pathology. And when you look at the cost-benefit analysis of pathology, how would you like it to go? Would you like the pathology to go at the roots, or would you like it to reduce to a minimum and manage it? And there it becomes a question of choice. So we don't see it as a kind of a unmitigated disaster, as a non-negotiable predator who has to be erased. We look at it from a cost-benefit point of view. We look at it holistically, and we also look at if the choice can be for an optimized syntheon. Because the productivity you don't want to let go, and the ideal that you should preserve the productivity but let go of the core of the pathology, which is the ideal, of course, the spiritual ideal. It may not be attainable, or it may not be wished for by the individual. So if it can be, nothing like it. I mean, at the end of it, pathology is pathology. But if it is not attainable, then at some sort of optimized syntheon may be the last choice of the person, and there we go and terminate the analysis. So this is how the heat model looks into it.
And can anything be missed in therapy of personality disorder if we go strictly by the archetypal route?
Yeah, if you're not trained in Freudian, Kleinian, or any other form of elemental psychotherapy, and you go straight into Jungian, this is a difficulty. That you may be dealing with mythology, analogy, metaphors, and they can easily lead you astray. And therefore, we must be clear that while we talk in terms of mythology, think in terms of archetypes, we should be clear about the concepts of split, projection, because what are the most common elements in personality disorders that we come across? We come across split, projection, omnipotence, fragility, stability, secret pleasure, early life loss, fear of attack, fear of loss, lack of courage, fear of death, fear of pain, deep entitlement, a dreamy nature, hypersensitivity, dependence, and a fusion, a desire for fusion, and a desire for omnipotence. So these are the elements we always come across in all the personality disorders, early or later. Any deep therapy which is long-term and deep enough will always deal with these issues. If we are dealing in archetypal terms, in terms of causality, destination, and also healing, then we have to be sure that these issues have been factored in. We may put those issues in archetypal terms, but they have to be dealt with in some way or the other. And if we don't deal with it individually, at least we have to be sure that they have been healed, that they are not coming up as problems. It may be that we have not talked about them in elemental terms, but they got healed somehow. It's quite possible. It can be a macro healing of the micro element. But we have to be sure that these elements are there in personality disorders, and our healing has ensured that they are no longer problems. So if we know in elemental terms what to engage, what we have to heal, then at a macro level, if we deal in completely different language, doesn't make a difference. But let us say we deal at a macro level and we are not aware of these concepts, and these concepts present themselves as problems, the person would be lost. You'll be trying the same thing over and over again and not healing the core because it does not have knowledge about what is at the core. So this is a problem which has to be ensured that first people have elemental knowledge of these concepts and then they go into the macro realm.
So how about bringing in some innovative approaches to work with personality disorders?
One area of innovative approach is that of psychedelics.
Okay.
Stanislav Grof, he did very good work where in his psychedelic experimentations, he could see people visualizing, talking to, or being in touch with these archetypes. That was the most empirical proof ever of the archetype.
Fascinating.
So he used two techniques, psychedelics and later on the breathing work. It's called holotropic breathing.
Holotropic breathing.
He has written some books on that. So I have got them, but I am yet to read through them, the micro part of it. The holotropic breathing, and it's a very powerful technique, and it tells us that there is indeed such a layer of the psyche. So psychedelics is one very innovative area which can combine with this Jungian approach. It also combines very well with the ISTDP approach. Then some people practice dealing only with dreams in archetypal language. So they practice healing only using dream analysis. It can be night dreams, day dreams, induced dreams, lucid dreams, but dreams. It may be active imagination, but essentially it's a dream-like activity. So that is a very innovative second part, which can be, some people are using with personality disorders. Some are using what is called archetypal healing, where they talk only in those terms. And they use a lot of art, self-expression, and action. It's a combination of behavioral action and art therapy. This combination they use. And in HEAT, we, apart from everything else, we use it also as an existential thing. How to go deep inside, and how would you like to optimize the archetypal part of yours? And how much of the surreal and how much of the real you would like to optimize inside of you? And which sectors of the surreal you really like or you are terrified of? And how do we work in the surreal? So these are some of the innovative ways. And then you have the valley junction model that I have created, where the core issue is how do you fill up the vacuum of the valley so that the valley comes to the level of the road, and the person who is hanging from the cliff can let go of the rope of omnipotence and settle on the road instead of fearing falling in the valley. And this is at the core of personality disorders, that the man is hanging from something he can't let go of because he fears something worse than his present condition. So he's hanging to a problem in the pursuit of not falling into a bigger problem, and he can't let go of that rope of the problem. So unless that valley is healed, he can't let go of what he is holding on to. And in our terms, we would say he is holding on to the personality disorder. So the problem, as we state it, as we write in DSM, is at a deeper level, a dysfunctional solution to a bigger problem. And unless that bigger problem is solved, this problem you can't let go of, because it is your only exit route from that more difficult crisis. So
enriching and opening a new ground it was for me. Hope our viewers enjoyed it as well. See you all again. Namaste.
Namaste.